Welcome back to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen. I've got someone who's on the as a guest on the podcast today, and someone that I'm really excited to learn from. I'm speaking to Jamion Christian. He is a former Division One basketball coach. He is the podcast host of The Last Call, leadership, team building consultant, corporate and team speaker, former D1 champion, head coach at George Washington University, Mount State. Sorry if I said that wrong. St. Mary's University's men's basketball as well. Jamion, thank you for reaching out, man. Thank you for jumping on the podcast, and thank you for being here today, man.
Man, I'm fired up. I mean, I just love your energy from your post, and I've just been following for a few months now. So I wanted to have a chance really to connect with you, and I'm glad you're able to get me on.
Man, thank you. It's I love I've been manifesting, attracting a lot of connections and quality people, and to have you just magically reach out to me, man, was really, really cool. So, man, before we get into it, for guys listening, we're going to be going into leadership today. We're going to be going into team building. We're going to go into relationship building, high performance, working within teams, cultures, and all the above. But before we do that, man, I'd love to know your story. How have you been able to, achieve the things that you've achieved, and what's shaped you into the man that you are today?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate. My family is unbelievable. My mom was a teacher for 35 plus years in special education. And so they always say my patience comes from my mother. My father was a borderline Olympian. He traveled with the Olympic traveling team for about 4 years and a 7-time track and field All-American. So we get our discipline, our athleticism from our father. My brother is actually working for the Boston Celtics right now.
Wow.
And so, we've got this unique family dynamic where it was important to be good at things. And when you talk about being good at things, it's more about the practice of how you become good at things, not being afraid to work for something that's in the distance, but recognizing the work that you have to do each day. It was important in our household to dream, but it was also important to work towards that dream and understanding what was going to take to get there. And so myself becoming a head coach at 29 years old, one of the youngest head coaches in Division I college basketball history.
Wow.
In the NCAA tournament at 31 years old. I just got a great jump start, from my background. And since then, obviously you hit on it a little bit. Mount St. Mary's at 29, head coach at Siena College, where we have the biggest turnaround in Division I basketball history that year.
Wow.
And then on to be a head coach at George Washington. So the story's still being written as I'm a guy who's really driven, but I love learning, and that's how our paths have kind of crossed one another.
Man, I'm a big sports fan, so I rarely get to speak sports and leadership and team and performance. So I'm really pumped to just connect with you, man. Hear a little bit more. I'm a basketball fan, but I don't really play the sport. It wasn't really my thing growing up. I'd like to know, if you could just paint the picture for me and also my Australian audience. So what level are you playing at in terms of coaching high performance teams? Because in Australia, we were saying this before we started recording, we don't really have a college division. We don't really have college sports. It's like the feeder clubs or feeder divisions to get into professionals are through the professional sports themselves. So it's kind of like the Miami Heat will have their feeder development team into the Miami Heat. You don't have college into that and a draft system. We don't really have that. So could you just maybe clarify, a little bit of the system, and then where do you fit within that system, just for a bit of context?
Yeah, in the system here, you have the NBA teams, which are some of the best players in the world that from all around the world play there. Then you have the G League, which is basically their minor league system.
Yep.
And then you have Division I college basketball, which is where the top players from the NBA will be drafted from, where a lot of the G League players will come from. So it's a pretty high level of basketball. In the United States, D1 is a really big deal to be able to coach there and to be able to play there.
Beautiful, man. Man, I watched Coach Carter when I was younger. It was one of my favorite movies. I've watched it so many times. I get goosebumps thinking about it because my high school teacher, we used to watch it before our footy games and really got us fired up. So let's go into coaching, man. What is it that's drawn you to be a coach? Why do you love coaching? And then we'll dive into coaching a little bit.
I love connecting with people and helping them work towards their dream. It's really that simple. You come into this game and we all love playing sport. Whatever sport is, we all kind of grew up loving a sport. And to have a chance to take someone's dream and be able to push it towards where they want to go to, I just love doing that. We would actually put in our offices, every place I worked, we'd put baby pictures of our players. And above the baby pictures on the wall, it would say, protect their dreams.
Mm,
And I wanted to
like
be a
that.
reminder for every person that came in our office what we were there for. For me being a college basketball coach, I was living my dream. That's what I wanted to be able to do. I wanted to impact in that way. But the responsibility of a leader isn't about me. It's about doing what's best for the people
Mm,
that I'm leading and the people that I'm working alongside. And so I wanted that to be the first thing you saw every time you came in. And I think that's really important to understand that although we are all striving and wanting to achieve, the strength of a leader is finding a way to help everyone become the best that they are able to become.
It's beautiful, man. How do you do that? This is if you're okay going tactical today, I
Yeah, yeah,
love
yeah.
leadership. I'm not sure if you've seen the documentary, The Coach's Playbook, or it's like a series on Netflix or Disney Plus or something, but it's really cool. And I got some awesome takeaways from that. But what are some of your tactics as a coach? How do you said help people achieve their dreams or work towards their dreams? Awesome. What are some of the tactics or strategies or even just philosophies that you have to be able to help people work towards their dream as a coach?
Well, I believe you got to really love people.
Mm,
And this notion of love, this notion of love is really complicated for everybody because we all sort of bring our own individual bias into this notion of love. And so I try to make it as simple as possible. Like when you love someone, you love their strengths and their weaknesses.
mm,
You love both parts of them. You also love who they're wanting to become. You also love the person they've been in the past, and that it's allowed them to be where they are today. I think that's really important when you're like leading a group, especially in sport when I'm leading in college. So they're still like borderline changing from kids to men. They're kind of in that in between phase where they still might believe in Santa Claus, right? So I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to help them. And so my tactic is different than most. I am not about transactional leadership
mm,
in sport. I
yeah,
think it has to be transformative. And to be transformative, you have to really know the person and what's driving them, what impacts them, who has that influence over their lives. And all those things we're talking about right there take time to get to know the true value of a person. And it takes time for you to really gain that trust. So from day one, you sign up to work with me. I'm trying to build that trust so we can
mm,
find, I always say you have one thing that's holding you back from being the best you can become.
mm.
And we're trying to work to find out what that one thing might be.
Mm. Man, you've got a lot of books behind you. I was trying to figure out what they are. I think there's a bit of Jocko Willink up there. I think he's up there
Yeah.
somewhere. Man, I would like to know your views on leadership. Like you've mentioned it already a couple of times, and I know a coach and leadership they intertwine. You've got to be a great coach is a great leader, a great leader is a great coach. So, I guess what's your views on leadership? And then we'll go a bit deeper on that.
Well, I think my first view is that we are in need of a lot more leaders than what we have.
Mm, absolutely.
Um, in business and in sport, people progress not because they're great leaders all the time, but because they're great managers or they're great at doing a specific job.
Mm,
And that's problematic when you get into that leadership position because no longer is it about what you do best. It's about helping everyone else learn what they do best and getting them to be able to do that at their best ability.
yeah.
And so I think when people come into that leadership position, and I'm sure you see it a ton as a leadership coach, they come into these leadership positions a lot of different ways. And it's really about helping them understand what their true purpose is. And it may or may not be, right? And that's what you have to figure out as a leadership coach. It may or may not be what they've been doing already
Yeah.
and giving them that perspective, that 30,000-foot perspective of how they can impact the group as a whole. And so I start there with leadership because I think that's a thing that we sort of say leader and we think of one type of leader.
Yes. Yes.
Usually it's like the big, strong, loud,
Commander.
boisterous person, right?
Yeah.
And I don't view that as leadership always. That
Yeah.
sometimes you do need that kind of leadership. I'd always say like I'm the adaptable leader.
Yeah.
If I need to yell and shout in front of the group, then I'll do that. But most of the time, it's about having the conversation on a day-to-day basis because you have the relationship. The conversation will save you some pain in the future. It'll save you some time in the present, but you got to be able to dive deep and have those kind of conversations that are important and that are sometimes tough.
Beautiful. Well, I was literally writing down tough conversations as you said the word. How do you approach tough conversations as a leader? As a coach, how do you approach them?
I think the most important thing is to commit to having them. And what we would try to do, I think one of the first things that you try to do when you take over organization, again, look, we rebuilt 3 teams. And when you're a Division I head coach, you're basically a CEO of a multi-million-dollar business. I mean, that's what you're
That
writing.
that's
We
pretty cool, man. That's pretty
right,
cool.
and we rebuilt 3 programs pretty quickly. In terms of fixing the culture, getting the right kind of players in there, getting the guys in the right place. And so I think that's a challenging thing that you have to do when you step into a new position. And again, the first thing I always think is most important is just gaining that understanding of what is needed in those moments.
Mm. Man, there's a couple questions in that. What was the rebuild like? And again, I don't understand the system
Yeah.
over in the States where you're from. So can you paint the picture? You you came into something and the rebuilding. What'd you come
Yeah.
into and what was that sort of journey like? And what were some of the key things, the pillars you put in place?
Yeah.
Because like I said before the call, I'm a rugby fan and I'm kind of relating your examples to what I've seen. And there's
Yeah.
been like some clubs that have struggled and there's certain people have gone in and turned the club around. And the rugby I follow, the Penrith Panthers that have won the last 2 years in a row, 5, 6, 7 years ago, they were coming last. They were really struggling. And then they had a big rebuild phase and now they're winning. So what was the rebuild? What did you come into and how did you rebuild?
Yeah. Well, all the rebuilds are different, number one. And, I would say this, I think anytime you're in a rebuild, you have to make people decisions, and people decisions are big decisions.
Mm.
Like a lot of times people will come in and, a consulting firm will come in and they'll sort of just look at the spreadsheet and they'll just cut employees by how much money they're making, and I just think that's really risky. So the first thing that we try to do when we come into a new place is we just try to assess what is needed, who is there, and what they can do to be better. There's so many times we've come into positions and let me give you this so you can give a little context. When you become a head coach, they interview you 3 or 4 times in like a 48-hour span.
Yeah.
All right. It's really one of the craziest experiences that you're going to have. You're going to take over this $1 million business. You're going to meet these people in the room. You're only going to meet like 2 or 3 people. You're going to meet the president, the athletic director, maybe one other person.
Yeah.
They're going to pick you out of thousands of people, and you're going to show up on campus to a group of guys, usually 13 guys on scholarship, 16 guys on a team.
Yeah.
And they've probably just had a really bad season.
Yeah.
Have had a really bad experience with the coach before them. And usually they have very little trust in the coaching staff that's going their way out.
Wow.
So now when you're coming in as a new coach, if the first thing you do, and I made this mistake, my third opportunity, I made this mistake. The first thing you do is you remove a player. Well, that puts everybody up in arms. Like everyone's now saying, I got to protect myself.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous because trust is built through vulnerability. And we know that.
I was just writing down the word vulnerability as you said it.
We got great synergy.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of times when people come in, they'll try to replace all 13 players on the scholarship and just start all new. And our strengths of our rebuilds honestly have been that we have not done that. Yeah. We've brought in what we believe in with people. And what we've tried to do is just see who could fit into our style of play, who could fit into our culture and how we want to operate. And we've been able to find players. Each time we found all conference players that were not all conference players before.
Yeah.
Players that went from averaging 1 point a game to 14 points a game, which is a huge jump.
Yeah.
And we found that at both places. And so I just think we sometimes undervalue the power of environment, and the change in environment can really help. So, when we come in, I'm really trying to, we'll come in, we kind of do an activity where the first thing I'll do is I'll give them a card and I'll say, write the 5 people that you have that have the biggest influence over you and why. And from this card, I basically now know who to contact in their lives, right? It just gives me like a ton of information. The why is important because they'll give you characteristics that they value in people,
nice.
Right? And so now when I meet with them and we talk about like the first conversation isn't about, well, I don't think you can fit here. The first conversation is more like, hey, look, I'm here. I'm going to kind of look at things for the next month or so. I want you to talk to me about these 5 people in your life and explain to me why they're important to you and explain to me why would you mind if I call these people and just get some more context about you? Because I don't know you and I want to get to know you better.
I love this, man. This is beautiful.
Right?
This is
so
beautiful.
It just gives you a different perspective. And that's how I want my first few days to be. It's getting to know the guys, them knowing that I'm making the effort to get to know them and get to know their stories.
Really cool, man. John C. Maxwell is a huge influence for me. I'm not sure if you understand him or you've gone down his rabbit hole with leadership. And one of his books, I think it's Good Leaders Ask Great Questions. And You're a very good question asker. You're like those questions you're asking and those activities you're doing just to understand people and connect with them, be vulnerable with them is so awesome, man. It's really, really refreshing to hear. I wanted to ask something around the balance of support and challenge. And I guess my views as a coach is you got to know when to do one or the other. You need support when they need it, but you need a challenge when they need it as well. How do you find that balance?
Dude,
I've
I
been
love
guilty.
this.
I've been guilty of
Yeah.
with my team. There's one that comes in mind. Richard, if you hear this or you listen to this, I was too challenging, too much. Just I broke him, I burnt him, and I ruined a really good relationship. I was 21 at the time, and I was still figuring out my leadership style. I love what you mentioned. I had the illusion of what a leader had to be. They had to be the
Yeah.
firm, hard, directed decision maker, and which is actually quite opposite of me. I'm quite a vulnerable, open, transparent guy, and I was trying to be someone that I want, and I wasn't, and it ruined that relationship. And it was such a good team member that we had. But I've also been the opposite. I've been too supportive, where I haven't had the tough conversations as well. So, how do you find that balance as a leader, as a coach, with businesses, with athletes, of supporting them and challenging them?
Well, I think the first thing is wanting to support is important. Not everyone feels like, especially in sport, not everyone in sport feels like they have to support. I mean, if you look at the fan blogs from these NBA playoffs, they don't feel like any of the players should support it. They feel like the players should be paid a healthy fee and that they should play at the highest level all the time.
Yeah.
I think support comes from like when I think of support, I think of how are the ways that I can show my players that I love them. Right. Because when you're the leader, everything that's happening inside the organization, the players are looking back at you as though you're controlling all that stuff. And so one thing we did, which I thought was super important at GW, and if I work in college again, I want to be in an environment where this is a part of the culture. We brought in a therapist, which I thought was really important because I wanted our players to work through any kind of traumas that they had. I felt like, especially in the African American community, we don't always seek out help for mental health. So it's my responsibility as a leader to make it so prevalent and so easy
Love
to
this.
have
Love.
that, and so we brought a therapist. We basically had her 24 hours a day whenever the players needed her. She would come to practice when she wanted to come to practice. We started off doing actually a bunch of team activities so the guys would start to get comfortable with her, and we just wanted her to be part of the coaching staff. And I wanted to be separate from me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it's important for them to have someone that they can go to that feels like that they know they can speak with, that isn't going to dictate their playing time.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's really important. We also brought in a mental skills coach because I think that's really important.
Yeah.
We brought in a mindfulness coach as well. And we brought in like a yoga specialist and different people who had a coaching background.
Yeah.
And the only thing we didn't bring in, which I wanted to bring in, was someone in the spiritual realm. Because I feel like if you hit those 4 or 5 things with a team, people are going to connect with certain people throughout it in terms of just who they enjoy more. Yeah. And I think we underappreciate that. Like, we get a lot of these teams and they'll have, we have a team therapist, go see a therapist. But if you're not making those people a part of your everyday, a part of your way, I don't call it like culture. I call it our way of life. This is just the way that we live every single day. So we did that for support. We also had a mentor for every one of our players. Which is unique. Most teams do not do this. This is a thing that was popular in the 90s in college basketball, and people have kind of gone away from it.
Yeah.
We brought in alums or people that are prominent in our community to be mentors to our players, usually in their field of study. So that offered another level of support in terms of internships, in terms of understanding the world, and they had certain things they had to do with them as mentors. They had to meet with them once a month. They had to spend time with them, all these different things. Our mentors did a great job. So I felt like building out that world of support was really important. And then I could still support, but I could also still challenge. And I wanted to be able to challenge in a place where the guys, like, let's honestly, I think the problem with supporting and challenge as a balance is that if I know someone's hurting, it's really hard for me to challenge them.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I might have to challenge them, not just for themselves, but for the good of the group.
Yeah.
So I felt like adding these teams of people for the guys allowed the players to come to practice and games more clear-minded, clear-headed. Right. So we walk through these lines. We're going to be able to challenge. We're going to be able to push forward. So I feel like that helped me kind of bridge that gap in between. And it's sort of like when we walk through these lines, we've got to be ready to go and compete and be at our best.
Such an awesome answer, man. Like, man, this might be a 10-hour podcast, but I've got your level of open-mindedness, I guess, from the spiritual, the therapist, the mentorship, and all that stuff. Where does that come from?
You know, I was a good high school player. I was a really good high school player. My dad being a track champion, like, track and field guys are interesting because they train for 10 seconds.
Yeah.
I mean, they're training, insane lifting and speed and sprinting, and they've got to run straight for 10 seconds. And if they're 0.2 seconds too slow, they don't medal, and everything they've worked for doesn't. And so my dad started me out meditating when I was really young, when I first got into sport. I remember being 9 years old, and I went out and pitched my first game, and I like walked the bases loaded and found a way to get out of it. But I was like super nervous, and I could tell he must have known from the stands I was nervous.
Yeah.
And so the next day he kind of walked me through a small meditation that he would do.
Cool.
And so that just made me aware of my breathing and aware of like just being able to settle my mind and put myself in the right place. Like, so he got me off to a great start there. And then I became a good high school player. I was a really, really good high school player, Virginia State Player of the Year in the year 2000, undefeated team. And as a player in college, I couldn't get over myself. And I don't mean that was selfish. I mean that to be the player that I needed to be and how hard I worked. I mean, I was making 1,000 shots in the morning and 1,000 shots at night.
Fucking
So
hell,
I'm like I can lock myself in and go for something. But then I get in the game, and it was like a complete waste, because I'd get in the game, I'd miss my first 3 shots, and I'd be like mentally a wreck.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like I put all that work in to be able to miss 3 shots in a row and have the confidence.
Yeah.
And so like just kind of balancing those two worlds out, I just said, what if we, and then when I became a coach, I recognized that the players I've really poured most of my time into and care and love and appreciated really performed well. So I said, well, what if when I become a head coach, let's create this world where we're constantly doing this from all angles.
It's really cool, man. Really, really cool. There's so many questions I want to ask you.
Ask them all.
How do you pick a captain? What are you looking for in I'm assuming like in league, you've got captains. Do you have co-captains and vice captains? Is that a thing as well?
That's a great question. I'm like a non-captain person.
Okay. Maybe
That's why this is a great question.
Do you look for, obviously everyone in their own right is a leader, but is there a leader or a captain set up in how you operate?
Yeah. So what we would do, picking captains is so interesting, because if you let the team pick, usually they'll pick the most talented player.
Yeah.
Because it's like an easy thing that they can vote on that the most talented player won't be mad about. Right. Yeah. But I just think leadership is so much more than talent. And Absolutely. I think we want to constantly be growing. We want to constantly be growing our leaders. So we didn't necessarily have captains, but we would choose leadership in terms of, we'd have like, we call them like commanders. So we'd have like a commander for communication. So every time there was like something that needed to be communicated to the team from the coaching staff or from the players to us, they'd be able to communicate that through the commander communication. We'd have a commander of, so that'd be like one example. We'd also build out these different things, like, let's say we're ordering food on the road. So we would build committees for food. You'd have the food committee, you have the event committee. And usually by the time you get done, you have just about the entire team in some form of leadership.
Yeah.
Because if a guy doesn't want to lead on the communication and be out in front, or lead with energy and effort, he might say, well, I want to be in charge of the events, coach. Right. And so we have 3 people in charge of events. And so we're going to go to X number of events each year, and they get to vote on which ones they want to go to, and they get to pick which ones, and whatever they want to do, we're going to go and do. You do the same thing with the food committee. We go on the road. And so I just think like giving people opportunity to be in leadership positions, whether they're big or small or whatever, there's all these decisions that have to be made. Let's just get as many people involved in it as possible. I felt like that created ownership. It created great buy-in. And the other thing is great is that if the food committee orders the food, they can't get mad at the coaches for ordering it, right? And so it gives some conversation between them and with the team, and I think it makes it go more smoothly by removing us from some of the decision making and allowing them just to have the freedom to be able to go and do it.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful answer. I've got a story that I'd like to share, then I want to hear your thoughts on it. So something I got taught in my leadership journey was no one man or woman is more important than the mission. So the mission comes first, the team comes first, what we're here to do. And there was an awesome conversation. It was on, he's the CEO of LinkedIn. Back when I watched it, I'm not sure if he still is or not. I forget the gentleman's name, but the question was, how do you, I guess, work with a team member who's not performing? And how do you like either work with them to get them to step up and grow or to get rid of them? I know business and sports can be very brutal. It's a business. It's a you're paid to get a result. It's a result driven business. And he had a conversation, went something along the lines of this, saying like, "Hey, Jamion, look, right now, connect, build some rapport, and connect with him vulnerably, and saying, look, Jamion, right now your performance is here, but we need you to be here for the mission, for the team, for the performance, for the result. I'm willing to work with you to get you up to this part, the standard that we need. Are you prepared to do the work needed to get yourself there?" And it was something along the lines. I've actually used that kind of mental model to help me with my team where their KPIs aren't being hit or they're slacking a little bit and it's a holding back the mission. I want to understand your ways of thinking around you've got a team member who's not performing or is holding the team back. And it's that balance between, I know this is a struggle I've had as a leader is, am I not a good enough leader or are they the wrong fit? And just making that decision for me, I've been too nice. Like I said, I've put up with the poor behavior because I see the best in them. I see how they can do it. Have I taken extreme ownership? Have I taught them, given them the skills, the resources, the training to get them to the level? And it's still something I'm learning, to be honest. It's still something I don't think I'm that amazing at as a leader. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you this: when we've had our way of life at the highest level, people remove themselves.
Mm,
When the
I like that.
competition was at the highest, when the care was at its highest, when the love was at its highest, people would just come at the office and say, "Coach, I just don't fit here." It was blatantly obvious that they fit or didn't fit. Um, and we would know it and they would know it. So I think you want to always strive to have a way of life that has that clear cut line where the person still, and I want you to understand, the person came in, it wasn't that they didn't feel supported by us. It wasn't that they didn't feel like we didn't want them to do well. They didn't feel excluded. They just said, this just isn't the right place for me, for how disciplined I'm requiring you to be here, how you want to play. Coach, this isn't a great fit for me, but I appreciate you. And so the pathway to get there, Lewis, I really believe in like just level of transparency with our players and
Mm,
our players. Always think about this. Our players have probably 4 to 10 people that are connected to them. So it's really like 40 people for one player, or
yeah.
like it's a big list for people. So what we try to do in the off season is when we have our postseason meeting, we invite as many people that want to be in the postseason meeting as possible. Right? Like we're going to talk about how you're going to improve this year, the things that we need to see. And I mean, I'm sure it's like the KPIs. Like we have a metric for everything. If we're gonna take shots for 5 minutes, you've got to be at this level to take these kind of shots in the game, and this is how we're gonna get there. So we already have that sort of built out in terms of our basketball strategy. And so we go into the meeting and we'll say, hey, this is where you need to be at. These are the drills we're going to do to be able to get you there. And we just want everybody on the same page. By having everybody on the same page, when they come in and say they're going to leave or they're going to depart or go somewhere else or it doesn't work out, no one's looking at us saying that we didn't do everything that we could.
Mm,
And we document all of it. Like a lot of times, and I've been in some situations. My wife is in business, so she works in that, and they're going to fire someone. They're going to put them on a plan, on an improvement plan, right? Um, but if that person didn't know the metric they need to improve on until that meeting, I
mm,
want them to know the metric they need to improve on well before they get to the meeting.
yeah.
We've got 3 months of shooting. I want the players locked in on these drills that are going to help them be better at those opportunities. And then, now if the guy puts in 3 or 4 months and doesn't improve at the level he needs to for the testing part of it, then he's not really going to be looking at us. He's going to just say, maybe I'm just not good enough at this skill.
Mm,
And if that's required to play at this position. And so I think that transparency is super important. Not just you need these metrics to improve, but these are the things that we're always doing to help you improve in these areas.
yeah.
And then and then one of the things that we adjusted to, which I thought was one of the best things, is we just met with our players more. We'd basically meet with our players once every 10 days. Every one of them, they'd have a meeting with me, and we would just talk.
Yeah.
I'd actually give them a list of questions and they could ask me whatever they wanted to ask me, and we would talk about whatever they wanted to talk about.
Mm,
Right.
love.
And so I just felt like that level of transparency just gave me great confidence. It gave them great confidence. And it just allowed us to have a better working relationship on a day-to-day basis because we're all invested in it and them being their best. And they recognize from our leader and from our coaches that we're invested.
Epic, man. Really, really awesome answer. Beautiful answer. In terms of onboarding someone like into their culture, you've mentioned the word culture about 3 or 4 times throughout this. A couple of okay. My view on culture, anyways, is it makes or breaks a business, makes or breaks a team, makes or breaks a relationship. And the analogy I got told, it's like kombucha, if you're familiar with kombucha.
Yeah.
And if you're brewing kombucha, if one fruit fly gets into the kombucha, it ruins the whole batch. So like one little tiny little thing this big can ruin like 10, 20 gallons of kombucha. And it's like that's how sensitive culture can be. And I don't know these numbers if they're true or not, but what I've been told is it can take 30 days to ruin a culture, like absolutely destroy it. And it can take up to 3 months to rebuild to where you were, even longer. What's your view on culture and how do you build and maintain a high level culture?
Yeah. The who you allow into your organization is so important. And again, you work with a ton of leaders. I'm amazed at how many leaders just don't know who they are.
Mm,
And if you don't know who you are as a leader, if you don't know the chances that you can take and work with, if you don't know the headaches that you can put up with for success, you're gonna make a lot of you're gonna make a lot of people mistakes.
mm,
So I think the assessment of like for me, it's like what kind of players have played best for me. What kind of players have played the worst for me, and what kind of players played the worst for me but played better for somebody else.
mm,
Right. And those are kind of the three questions that I basically ask every year. I'd ask myself,
mm.
because I want my players to play best for me. I don't want them to play better for somebody else. Not that if they leave and they go have success, I'm not looking at them negatively, but I want to do my job at such a high level that they play their best basketball for me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's like really important. And for me, when I got some experience, I was 10 years in as a head coach. So when I got a little bit of experience, I could really look and say, man, like I'm really good with this type of player at these positions, but I've taken a lot of risk on these kind of people and it has never worked out.
Mm.
And those people that I took risk on, I'm a strong communicator. We're strong communicators.
Mm.
Okay. And they were really strong communicators. So I would buy into their level of communication, which, I always say like, you do these job interviews. It's easy to get fooled by someone who interviews really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, that I feel like that's the trickiest part about a job interview is like, I'm bringing them in, they interview really well.
Yeah.
I say, this is a guy that can get it. He hasn't gotten it yet. He can get it. I've underestimated hunger. Right. Early on I did. I get corrected that later. But the hungry guy, the hungry dog always eats.
Yeah.
And so just assessing those things within yourself of what your values are and what you're really trying to get out of the experience. Usually, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if what I'm trying to get out of the experience is what you're trying to get out of the experience, we're going to really find a pathway to be successful, even if we get off the track a little bit.
Absolutely.
But if what I value, you don't value, it's really hard for me to get you in the same place. And again, I'm super open-minded. So I'm not a person that says, you've got to be thinking the way that I'm thinking, but we just got to be going in the same direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think what's their vision or their purpose or where they're heading? What are their values? Are theirs and the companies or the organization or the teams in alignment? And can we both get congruently what we want? And then I kind of address, and then you overcome the tactical stuff along the way. What are the business?
I'll give you a quick story. Some of the best guys I've had, and we've had this year we had the best player in college basketball, Jalen Pickett. He's the best player in college basketball. He had no opportunities, he had no offers to go to college. We took him at Siena. We had leading shooters at different places, and these guys all were just, we came to recruit them. They were like, Coach, I'll do whatever you want me to do. And we took them. And then there'd be guys that are so talented because you're in a talent business.
Yeah.
And then you have a guy on the other end of the spectrum will say, Coach, what position are you going to play me in? The guy that asked me what position he was going to play in, never succeeded under me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because from day one, they were looking at what we were going to give them, not
Yeah.
what they could give to us. Right. But you learn that as you're a leader and as you grow in it.
What do you look for outside of talent? What are the traits, the characteristics, the mindset, what are the things that you look for as a coach when you're looking for team members?
Yeah, talent's one of the easier things to find. You find there are a lot of talented people out there that can do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I want people, we call it like, can you reach max capacity?
Mm.
Do you have the ability to reach max capacity? We say, do you have the capacity to reach max capacity?
Yeah.
I know we use capacity twice in there, and that's kind of strange for some people, but
Yeah.
it just means like, do you have the ability to say, hey, this is what I want to do, and then the passion to go and try to work for it.
Yeah.
And then the passion to try to go and work for it without fear is super important.
I like that.
Because you're not rarely do you get there early. You usually get there what you think is late, but rarely isn't early. So you talk to a freshman, say, I want to be all conference player this year. I want to be all conference player this year. And it's probably going to be as a sophomore, you're going to be all conference player. Yeah. You're going to, just the stuff you need to learn right now, you just don't know yet. And, we always say it's a race to maturity. And maturity is recognizing and learning along the way and not making the same mistake twice. Maturity is recognizing maybe I'm too high in this moment and I need to come down, or maybe I'm too low in this moment, I need to rise up.
Yeah.
We learn that as we get older, but it's a lot of pressure to ask an 18 and 19-year-old to have maturity in those ways.
What are your top 3 leadership books?
Ooh, 3 of them. Principles.
I was actually looking at it. It's behind you, right on that shelf, black and white. Yeah. So awesome.
It's excellent. It's a long read, but it's excellent. I actually would say the Energy Bus, I would throw that in there as well. And then I would say the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Okay. I know those last 2 are different than Principles. I've read a lot of different ones, but I can constantly come back to Energy Bus. Like, we would use Energy Bus with our team often because it has these visuals that people can really hold on to. If a person's being an energy vampire, they like really understand that. Like, you're being an energy vampire right now. They really get that notion. You know what I mean? And then 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, because it lays out how you build trust and how trust is the most important thing you can have. And if you don't, and usually the organizations, when we win, we have great trust and we move on up that pyramid. And when we didn't have great trust, we just kind of stuck there and just couldn't get above ourselves. Yeah. And it's just an easy visual, easy to understand. And Principles is just like this systems book that just puts you in a place mentally where you're saying, I can do more. Yeah. I can do more. I can be better. I need to find other ways to keep improving.
I'm due to reread it. I did the audio a while ago. This is just a learning light bulb I've had is I got guilty of doing books to do them rather than to actually learn and retain them. So I'm actually going through and reading the hard copy of all the audio books that I've done. So I've given out my copy of Principles. I'm waiting for a team member to bring it back. So I am due for a reread of Principles. Mate, just we'll start to wrap it up. But there was one question. I'll come back to it. There was a question that I wanted to ask before we wrap it up. Mate, this has been a really awesome podcast. Just beautiful energy between yourself and myself. Great value all around culture, all around leadership, all around team building. If someone wants to connect with you, just to connect and say thank you, or to work with you in any manner, shape, or form, what's the best place they can find you?
You can find me on pretty much any platform. Jamion Christian, Jamion Christian, Christian. Luckily for me, my first name is really unique. So usually when you type that into Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram, it pops right up. So you can find me on any of those platforms, and I check all of them pretty regularly.
That's awesome, man. Man, there's one unique question for you, but one question I do ask everyone to finish this off with. What's something that you're working through, growing through, healing through that no one else gets to see?
Well, I got fired last April. So I've just been going through this, like, honestly, it's going to sound crazy, this like beautiful process of learning. It's weird. People think that being fired, like, really like damage you, the act of being fired.
Yeah.
But that part didn't damage me as much. Like, you know where the season's going, you know how you kind of can feel that wave. And I'm not a person who's embarrassed because I live a pretty humble life. Right. So it's like, you recognize these things can sort of happen, but I'm just working through this process of like loving coaching a team, loving being around players, helping them improve. And I could say it's beautiful because I've been able to really filter through the things that I enjoy most about it. Where if I was kind of caught up in the web of it, I wouldn't be able to identify. It took me a few months, like 5, 6 months, to identify what I loved about it.
Mm.
Because you kind of get caught up. You got to recruit, you got all these responsibilities you got to do every day, and you sort of get away from the things that you love most because you can snap your fingers and go right back into those things 1,000%.
Yeah.
So I could say it's been a beautiful process of just like learning, like relearning myself. I started playing college basketball at 18 years old. I then coached college basketball for 18 years and head coach for 10. I'm a different person than I was at the beginning. I'm better in a lot of ways. I understand myself better. So just making sure that when the next opportunity presents itself, I'm in a great place to go and attack it, and really knowing who I am as a leader, who I am as a person, even more than I did, 14 months ago.
Great answer, man. Man, this is a unique one. MJ or LeBron?
I love MJ. I grew up in the MJ era. His personality, like, there is no LeBron without MJ.
Mm.
And it's weird. Like, when you're like this, like, a student of the world, like, I assume you are and I am, you recognize that all these things are needed.
Yeah.
Like, LeBron's a billionaire now because Michael Jordan laid a blueprint for an athlete to own businesses, to have a shoe, to turn that shoe into these different businesses, into ownership, into all these other layers. No one had really done that before MJ.
Yeah.
And so I think his impact is remarkable on the game. Now LeBron comes along, he starts a school which sends every senior to college on scholarship, which is amazing.
Mm.
He also breaks the NBA scoring record, right? So he's also like an amazing player. But I would say MJ because he laid the groundwork, but I'd also say MJ because he people were afraid of him as a competitor.
Yeah.
And he just, I don't know if guys are afraid of LeBron. I think they respect his talent and they recognize his talent is immense. But MJ they feared MJ from year one with the Chicago Bulls. And I think that's really unique and that's really hard to do.
Man, I love that answer. I'm not a huge b-ball fan, like I've mentioned, but I've got a friend of mine. He's actually one of my team members, and he's a big LeBron fan. So I'm happy with your answer, my friend. Jamion, thank you so much, brother. This has been a fantastic conversation. Look forward to staying connected with you. And man, thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.